Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at today. Thank you for joining in for yet another live event where we unpack the multifamily underwriting one step at a time. Type in the chat where you're logging in from today. I'm definitely excited to be back and thank you for being here today. So type in the chat where you are joining from today. And while you're doing that, the topic that we'll dive into today is how to get comps right. Why does it matter? Because after cap rates, getting the rent comps and the rent assumptions right is the second most important element when underwriting a property because it has the second largest impact on the pro forma cash flow, valuation, and therefore pro forma returns of the investment. And that's for two reasons. One is the compound effect, namely growing that rent year over year off of the base. But secondly, everything in the P&L starts at the top line. So expenses and other assumptions flow through the top line. So if you get that wrong, you may find yourself in a really, really bad place or set yourself up for a really bad surprise. But for those who are joining in for the first time today and those who don't know me, my name is Vessi Kapulian. I'm a former commercial lender turned real estate investor, and now I actively invest in multifamily. I consult high net worth individuals and family offices on their investment offerings and structures. And I also work with investors new to multifamily to help them learn how to effectively and efficiently analyze a deal from beginning to end, even if they've never underwritten a deal before, in order to minimize the risk of loss. So type win in the chat if you are excited about learning about rent cops today and how to protect your investment after all. So I'll go through as much as possible in the short 15 to 20 minutes that we have today, including a live example. If you do have questions and we run out of time, feel free to DM me directly. And of course, I do cover this topic in a lot more detail within my underwriting community that also comes with a self-paced course access. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can also DM me directly, and I'm happy to address that during the Q&A portion of today's live event as well. So what are the rent comps? These are the rents that are charged by comparable properties to our subject property. And what does comparable mean? Well, there are a few key characteristics that we typically look at. One is a property that's in close proximity to ours, ideally within 1 mile, a property that's similar in condition, in age, in amenities, unit size, unit count. That would be the ideal comp. Now, recently I was presented with a deal that included a pretty interesting comp set. So the lead sponsor had basically taken the red comps from the broker's offering memorandum package. And interestingly enough, that was I think it was a 1985, maybe 1986 property. And the two of the five comps within that set were newer vintage or newer buildings. One was 2017 and the other one was 2020. So effectively comparing a Class A property to a Class C building. Needless to say, that also inflates the median rent or the average rent. And right off the bat, you're starting with an inflated assumption. And probably many of you already saw my video on the example for a market in Florida that I recently published. So very important to peel the onion, get into that level of detail, and really determine are the right comps being used? Because again, you want to set yourself up for success and not failure. And I certainly want you to succeed, which is why I'm sharing that. Where do you get rent comps is question number two. Well, there's a variety of sources. Of course, the broker, your property manager. There are paid data sources like CoStar, Yardi, RealPage. There are free listing sites like apartments.com, apartmentlist.com, Rentometer. And then, of course, your own local knowledge of the market, or you secret shopping these properties as well. None of these sources is perfect in and of itself, right? And so it's important to uh, take a look at least at a couple of sources. And I'll give you an example. So some of the free sites that I mentioned, like apartments.com or Rentometer or Apartments, these are listing sites. So they will show you the listed rent, but not the effective rent. And the only way for you to know the effective rent is to either have direct access to the data for that property, which paid sites like CoStar, for example, provide, or to do some secret shopping, right, and pretend that you're a tenant and looking to rent an apartment at that location, and then find out how much the cost of that is. But even sources like CoStar have their deficiencies. For example, during the heydays of the rent growth boom that was in 2021, 2022, basically the COVID years when rents were growing exponentially 10, 20, 30%, depending on the market. And the data typically, right, that's published in these paid subscription reports like CoStar Yardi, that usually is released on a lag basis. So it was already outdated. Also, I've noticed that in certain markets that are more maybe rural or less densely populated, less densely occupied, the quality of the data is also not that great. So again, all that to say is that it's important to validate at least a couple of those sources. And again, nothing will replace your local boots on the ground knowledge. And that goes back to one of an earlier live event that I did, namely one on the market and the importance of knowing and understanding the market. So check that live event if you have more questions regarding this, or you can DM me and I will send you the link. So let's go through a live example. What I'll do is I'll share the screen, my screen, and we'll go through a live property, and I'll show you how to do that, and then I'll open it up for questions. So let me share my screen. All right. So this is a property in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I'm going to apartments.com. Again, word of caution here. What we're seeing or will be seeing are listed rents, which may or may not be the same as effective rents. And the only way to find out is to do deeper diligence, or alternatively just get the CoStar Underwriting report for that particular pocket within St. Petersburg, and you'll get the actual data. So here is the building. Looks like a three-story garden style. The interior of the unit seems relatively renovated based on what we can see. So at least the ones on the photo, prudently they selected one that's in really good condition. So we can see that these are all one bed, one bath apartments, rented at about 1510 a month, about 700 square feet in terms of size. So I'm making a note of that. There are not too many amenities, and again, this is a 57 unit building built in 1968, so I wouldn't a lot. So your typical, I guess, class C property. Of course, you have the appliances, the laundry facility. Looks like they actually this property actually has an elevator. There is a playground, and that's about it. Some security access, so not too many amenities. So why I mention that is because what I will be looking at when I surface the area for comps are properties of similar size, age, unit size, and amenity package and condition. You can also see right off the bat here they're actually knocking down what is that, 67-70% of your first month rent. So they're already, the effective rents we know are already below the 1510 advertised rate. At least you can see that, but again, not all of them will post that information. So let's go to the map. We'll hit that uh, little button here in the top left corner, and it will show us the general area and properties, at least the ones that are advertising on apartments.com. Again, it's important to check with other sources, and you may uncover uh, comps that are better suited for the subject property that you are looking at. So I'm going to zoom in, and actually what I'll do is, because I really want to going back to that property because it automatically recognizes it. Zip code, hit enter. And I don't mean to regurgitate the pumps. Again, I mentioned close proximity, ideally within a mile. But it's also important to recognize we don't want to be crossing any major landmarks like major highways, major streets, mountains, rivers, lakes, oceans, etc. And so in this case, we see that the property is right here in this quadrant. If you do the deeper market analysis, I will basically say this particular area and this comparable highway, anything to the left of 49th Street, south of Central, or north of 22nd Avenue will fall into a comp. So since we're looking at apartments, there's actually a nice filter you can use here, and we'll just exclude single family homes. So we'll focus on quite a bit, and then we'll take a look at a couple. This one seems to be a single family home. Somehow it's snuck in the comp set, so we'll skip over that one, and let's just go here across the street. So this is Fountain Court Apartments. So right off the bat, it's a 3-story garden style, but it seems, let's click on it, and then we'll get the details to determine is this a comp that we can use for purposes of our analysis. So very similar renovated unit, didn't have the stainless steel appliances and the countertops. The fixtures, the plumbing fixtures seem to be a little outdated, but it does have other amenities like pool, whereas our subject property didn't necessarily have it. It does have the playground, which our subject had. So we'll start scrolling down. They have a mix of 1-beds and 2-beds. Their 1-beds are slightly larger, so closer to 900 square feet. Although here they're saying call for availability, and their pricing ranges from 1,400 to 2,800. So seems like maybe their 1-beds are closer to the 1,400 range, which is probably in line with laundry facility. So apart from the pool, the amenities seem pretty comparable, although they have a few other common common areas perhaps. This one is 1974 and 124, so slightly larger property, but similar in age, setup, and even amenities. So I would say that may be a comp that we want to look into. So let's go back and we'll pick one more, and then I'll open it up for questions. And so, give it a moment. Let's click this one. So this one seems like like a duplex. Um, sure, let's look at veranda flats. So this one seems in decent condition. The flooring is carpet in some areas and vinyl and others. This one, just based on the picture, seems like a larger property. They have the pool, the common areas, um, mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Their renovated one bed is about the same price range at 1,500, similar in terms of size. They have a unit looks, I'm not quite sure what that means, but that one is in the 1,600 range in terms of pricing. Um, we'll scroll down. Again, laundry facility. This one also has an elevator, pool, clubhouse, a few extra storage areas. So a little bit higher on the amenities package, but also 1971 build and 112. So I will definitely take that into consideration, included in the rent comp set, but probably assign a slightly higher premium for the extra amenities that this property offers. So I hope that was helpful, and let me know what questions you have. Feel free to type those in the chat. Um, one question that I see is, what is the ideal radius to select when selecting comps? Well, or what if I cannot find any good comps nearby? So usually that would mean expand the radius right before the beyond the 1 mile radius. So that's one option. And that usually you may have to do that, or even go 3, maybe even 5 miles if you're in a rural area, one with fewer residential buildings for rent, right? One that's not as densely populated. So it's not uncommon to expand that radius in those instances. Another case where I've seen that happen is in areas that are more geared towards homeowners versus renters. In other words, it may be a densely populated area, but most of the buildings there may be occupied by homeowners versus rent. In that case, you may not have a ton of apartment buildings available, and maybe people tend to rent homes, and that's what the local communities or clients or residents prefer. So in that case, you may have to expand the comp search to include even single family homes, right? If that's the only available stock where people reside, you may have to compare that and obviously assign a bit of a discount, right? If you don't have the yard, the extra space, the storage. These are things to consider, or maybe you don't discount if you offer a ton of amenities in exchange for the yard, for example. So that would be something to keep in mind. And again, it all goes back to really knowing and understanding your market. And I really want to give a shout out to one of the members of my community, Eric. We were reviewing a deal last week, and he's an expert on the Kansas City market. So that particular deal was in the Kansas City metro area, and right off the bat, he spotted a few inconsistencies in the assumptions, the representations about the market, and the growth rates and the trends there. That's number one. But secondly, the rent growth and the rent comps, he immediately spotted some pretty large inconsistencies. And so again, that would be something to pay really close attention to, because again, you don't want to get these rent comps wrong and set yourself up for failure. So I don't see any more questions coming through the chat, and so I really appreciate you being here today. If this was your first time watching, you can follow me on LinkedIn or YouTube to be notified of future live events, as I do plan on hosting those very often, and helping you master the art and science of underwriting. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about how you can join our community of investors who are leveling up their underwriting skills, which by the way comes with a self-paced course, you can DM me directly on LinkedIn, and we can connect and I'll share more information with you. Until then, I wish you a blessed day and I'll see you next time.